All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at Petr Macinka's briefing after the meeting with the NATO leaders, with Mark Rutte and so on. What will Master President Slayer, who blackmails even though he doesn't, tell us about this? I think the outcome is already known because Petr Macinka, it seems, has lost his political fight and things have been explained to him. But we'll see how he comments on it, or rather how he commented on it. And please write in the comments how much Petr Macinka makes you feel resistance or the urge to punch him. Because we've already had a few people here who admitted that even though they disagree with a lot of politicians, it's mainly and only Petr Macinka who awakens aggression in them, whether it's because of his appearance or his arrogant manner. All right, let's look at it.
With Mark Rutte, I'm especially interested if you discussed with him what was mentioned in the case of your messages, that you informed him about your disagreement with Petr Pavel representing Czechia at the NATO summit, whether that was the subject of the meeting, and if so, what else was discussed at the meeting.
I believe more important topics were discussed at that meeting, and the meeting was extremely friendly. It was held in a good spirit, and the information you're asking about probably isn't really something to be addressed at a meeting with the NATO Secretary General, because he more or less doesn't really care about that. That's more of an information that's important for our mission here at NATO. So those who need to pay attention, but it's an issue that will start to be addressed in a few months. So I think we'll still discuss it in the government.
Regarding our contribution to NATO,
Yes, so great. We got that over with quickly because Petr Macinka actually threatened that Petr Pavel wouldn't go to the NATO summit in Turkey, and at the same time that he could burn bridges in NATO if Petr Pavel didn't comply with him. And he also said that he could actually badmouth Petr Pavel in front of the media, which didn't really work out for him because Pavel countered, and before Macinka managed to fill the newspapers and media with stories that Pavel wasn't following the constitution and didn't want to appoint and all that. Pavel filled them with the story that Macinka was blackmailing the president, so he took a bit of the wind out of his sails. However, it's clear that Mr. Macinka has calmed down a bit, that he took a couple of deep breaths and didn't follow through on the threats he was making, at least in those text messages. Simply put, it's good that he slept on it and then realized that he probably doesn't have full support, whether from coalition partners or the public. And even though he's trying to play it off as a draw, he's heading for a solid defeat here.
Prague reported the government doesn't plan to raise defense spending above 2% of gross domestic product, according to Freedom and Direct Democracy leader Tomio Okamura. We know Mark Rutte strongly supports the 5% commitment or moving toward it. Did you discuss the future direction of Czech defense spending?
Well, certainly the topic of our contributions to defense and strengthening these expenditures was part of the meeting. I just explained our budgetary difficulties, that we are still in a provisional budget, that we met the 2% last year, but right now we are not able to give any outlook precisely because we don't have an approved budget. We are in a provisional budget, and therefore it is not possible to make any projections for the coming years. So we also talked about the fact that this is important for NATO leadership, and also about how we could approach it, what could be included among the eligible expenditures for that, and so on. So I think that a lot was said about this topic as well, about which direction we could take next, and I believe it was generally accepted.
Mr. Minister, Zdenka Trachtova, Czech Radio, good afternoon.
Yes, so there was discussion about spending on NATO and defense, and there was talk about the munitions initiative. Overall, regarding the current situation around Macinka, there is also a bit of controversy here that he allegedly reduced the vetting of people from Russia. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out in the end. All right, let's continue.
Yesterday, the Council responded to your statement by saying that our representation at the NATO summit in Ankara is a matter of agreement between the Prime Minister and the President, so it's not your decision. How do you respond to that? And the second thing is whether Prime Minister Babiš has already agreed, or if you have some kind of arrangement with him that he would go to the summit instead of the President.
I think that's premature. I won't comment on our private conversations with Prime Minister Babiš. So, if we're still going to talk about it, the President still has some time.
Is it just up to the Prime Minister and President to agree?
So, one thing is the agreement, another thing is that the mandate is approved by the government, and the third thing is that the ministry handles it technically. Those are three things that have to come together, so until they do, it won't happen. That's my position, but it's nothing personal. I'm just simply pointing out that Mr. President is acting outside the framework of the Constitution, and therefore it would be appropriate for us to adjust our actions and how we represent the Czech Republic abroad. That's all.
Yeah, sure. That's a pretty, let's say, weak card, because it's quite common for the Czech Republic to be represented abroad and at summits by the Prime Minister instead of the President. So in this regard, it wouldn't be anything extremely new. Of course, the question here is whether the government will approve it for him and whether they will come to an agreement with Babiš or not. Personally, I quite clearly perceive that a sort of silent coalition is forming between Babiš and the castle, because it's obvious that Babiš will need the president in the future, while after the vote on not lifting immunity for criminal prosecution, he actually won't need Petr Macinka much anymore. And so far, the Motorists for Themselves party is mostly harming the government, which is definitely not good for Babiš. And as for Macinka's interpretation that Petr Pavel is overstepping the constitution, saying that and at the same time being afraid to file a competence lawsuit is a terrible double standard. And if they don't intend to file a competence lawsuit and are afraid of the Constitutional Court, then it's like constantly shouting that someone is wronging you but not doing anything legally to make them stop, and just continuing to shout. You don't come across as very mature. At that point, you come across as rather annoying. That's the situation with Petr Pavel. It clearly said, if you don't like it, file a competence lawsuit, otherwise let it go. And it seems that once again, Babiš doesn't want to fight for Filip Turek, right? He'll probably drag it out until the vote of confidence, but I'd say that the moves, how he'll move the pawns on the chessboard, Andrej Babiš already has figured out, and he's not really counting on the pawn named Minister Turek. But we'll see. Maybe Andrej Babiš is a weaker player than I think he is.
Personally, I think that the dominant, important and only figure in the Czech Republic on the international stage is the Prime Minister. So I think it would be more appropriate for the Czech delegation to be led by the Prime Minister, who, by the way, has, I would say, a very above-standard relationship with the American president. And I think that is definitely an advantage, especially in the context of the North Atlantic Alliance. Thank you.
Here I might have to agree with Macinka that Petr Pavel doesn't have a very good relationship with Donald Trump, while Andrej Babiš is sucking up to him. So theoretically, you could say that it might even be more appropriate from the Czech Republic's point of view for Babiš to go to the summit if there are going to be talks with Donald Trump, if there are going to be any direct meetings. Because it's very hard for me to imagine Petr Pavel and Donald Trump meeting and Petr Pavel being able to deal with him respectfully. Because Donald Trump may be the American president, but Petr Pavel has the problem that he has a backbone, which at this moment, when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump, is not a plus. Therefore, Andrej Babiš, as the right adaptable worm, might be a more pragmatic choice. What do you think about that?
Mr. Minister Teresa Shupova, GTK, did you also discuss the Czech ammunition initiative with Mark Rutte? Because Mark Rutte has repeatedly mentioned this initiative in his speeches, emphasizing how important and beneficial it is.
Yes, the topic of the ammunition initiative came up. Of course, we discussed it. I explained the composition of our government, the positions of the individual coalition partners, and also the path we took to reach some kind of consensus. I explained to him that one of our coalition partners, Freedom and Direct Democracy, eventually agreed, even at the cost of undoubtedly paying a high political price for it, which he appreciated, that even at the cost of political expenses. In the end, Freedom and Direct Democracy got into a position where the Czech Republic would not block it, and both Mark Rutte and our Ukrainian partners view it positively, that it doesn't matter at all that the Czech Republic will no longer contribute any funds, but that we will continue to organize it, which I think is the dominant issue. That's the most important thing. Whether we contribute something or not isn't important for the Ukrainians, and it's not important for our Western partners either. They are glad that the ammunition initiative will continue, and I think the words of recognition directed at freedom and direct democracy that were heard today probably deserve to be highlighted.
Andrej Babiš asked you and the president yesterday to meet and negotiate. Are you open to this format?
Yes, I am ready for that.
And the opposition has already gathered signatures to convene today.
Yeah, here I'd like to say that Pavel actually refused to negotiate with Macinka in the first round and only wanted to negotiate with Babiš. That further supports my theory of a silent Babiš-Hrad coalition. I wouldn't be surprised if they were plotting against Macinka and the motorists or had a pragmatic agreement. And that Hrad-Babiš negotiation was also underscored by Babiš's statement, where he said he'd like Pavel to sort it out with Peter here, with Andrei assisting, but that if the president is against it, he'll meet with him alone. Which to me doesn't really seem like much of a fight for Peter Macinka. It seems more like, hey, I assume I'll meet with him alone and I'll deal with these things behind closed doors. That's the feeling I'm getting here. And honestly, it seems to me that there are a lot of clues here that confirm this theory. Also, regarding that meeting, if they asked Pavla why she doesn't want to deal with Macinka, I would dare to say that there might be some arguments that Macinka used against the journalists. Namely, that I don't want to talk to journalists from Denik N because motoriste are suing them. And at that moment, Pavel could say, I am not going to deal with Macinka because we are conducting an investigation against him from the National Center for Combating Organized Crime. I mainly want to talk to Babiš, since he is responsible for the ministers. I want to discuss the minister's dismissal with him, but is there any reason to talk about firing a minister with the minister himself? Yes, so there are plenty of ways to explain this, plenty of ways to play it. But please write to me if you also feel that there's some kind of plot between Pavel and Babiš against motorists, because Babiš really doesn't stand up for motorists at all. Yeah, like he says that he works well with them and so on, just to have them on his side for statements of non-release, but any kind of position that would go against the president, whether it's a competence lawsuit or now supporting Macinka in this matter, I've never seen that from him. He just wants to avoid conflict with the president.
Extraordinary sessions precisely in response to your text messages and the vote of no confidence in the government, so may I ask for your reaction?
The opposition likely won't focus on anything but no confidence votes and trying to dismiss people. That's just their job, and it doesn't surprise me. When they were in government, they also failed to do anything beneficial for the Czech Republic, so they're just continuing that pattern. It's not Mr. Rakusan, the pirates, or the Christian Democrats. It's President Petr Pavel.
Minister Kristina Jirinkova, respect. I would like to ask, Denik N and Seznam Spravi reported that you want to push for milder restrictions on travel for Russian diplomats in the government.
I don't know where Deniken is getting that from.
Thank you.
I know how some vague speculative sources are always cited in Deniken. It's amusing, but I noticed it too. I don't understand where they're getting their information or what they're referring to. The situation is actually simple. Simply put, new rules have now come into effect regarding the movement and notification of Russian diplomats within the territory of the European Union. It needed to be resolved quickly due to an upcoming deadline. I was ready, or at least had to resolve it at the lowest possible level. That means that if any Russian diplomats move from one country to another, they have to notify us about their movement, which is an advantage for us because at least we know about them and our intelligence services can check them and find out who they really are. We are aware of their movements, so I did what I could at the ministerial level, which means I signed the requirement for this notification, and the next step, which could be even stricter, meaning an additional authorization, has to be approved by the government. And since we were dealing with the budget, there wasn't room for it, so it can definitely be included in the agenda of another government meeting. So I think that once again, Deniken and other similar media are trying to stir up some kind of hot action here, but there is no hot action. We had to, because the European regulation applies, so we had to sign this. I signed it, so the notification has to be there. The next step, which is an even stricter tightening, has to be approved by the government. They haven't gotten to it yet. I think only Estonia and Lithuania among European governments have done it. So, but that's something that's really not urgent. If there was anything urgent, what I had to do and what I could do as the maximum step as a minister was to at least sign the necessity of that notification.
So you'll bring the tightening to the government. Do you know roughly when?
So the ministry is preparing the material and it will definitely be part of one of the upcoming government meetings. But as I said, it's nothing urgent. What was urgent was that we had to approve, or we had to incorporate into our rules, the European regulation regarding the notification. I did that, but the government still has to comment on it.
All right, so if I understand correctly, the information that access for Russian people, diplomats, and various individuals to our country will be made easier is, according to Macinka, fake news. All right, so we will expect some results regarding the tightening of these measures. And to put it in Mr. Macinka's words, you have 1 month for that. That's it. Anyway, who is Macinka? He's a person who comes from Václav Klaus's circles. He's basically a Václav Klaus cosplayer. An intellectually weaker Václav Klaus. That's basically the definition of Mr. Macinka. And politically less experienced, that's clear. Yeah, so Mr. Macinka gave a very long explanatory segment about this. And basically, it could have been explained simply, but let's say, he explained, we'll wait and monitor. Of course, all of you are supposed to keep an eye on him, but I'll take it as my own mission. If we're talking about the other things that were mentioned, there's probably no point in commenting on them because they were, let's say, arrogant remarks. Macinka has 2 modes. A dog that gives its paw. A suffering doe. 3 modes, a paw-giving dog, a suffering doe, and an arrogant bitch. Those are like the 3 modes she switches between. At this moment, she mainly switches between a suffering doe and an arrogant bitch, but most of the time she's a suffering doe.
Nova Television. Today, I'm revisiting today's meeting because you're planning to meet with foreign journalists, even if informally. I mentioned this since you wrote about it yesterday in one of your texts. I'm interested in what you'll be discussing with our colleagues here, or rather if you plan to mention your conflict with the President of the Republic.
Well, I'll be discussing whatever they're interested in. I can't read minds. I haven't found out what questions they'll ask me. I never do that. So you'll probably have to ask them what they're interested in.
Don't you want to tell them yourself?
I'll answer their questions.
I understand. Given that the media have already written about the whole case, it's pretty certain they'll ask him about it, and at that moment he's lost his advantage in the sense that in this case, he's the one writing emails trying to blackmail, even though he's not really blackmailing because he doesn't have any position from which he could blackmail, and he'll rather have to explain himself. That's how it is. In politics, whoever explains or reacts usually loses.
Mr. Minister, several Czech editors-in-chief signed a statement supporting Deník N, which was denied access to your press conference at the Chernin Palace. Can you explain why Deník N was excluded and if other media might face similar bans in the future?
Yes, it needs to be said that Macinka's behavior was incredibly arrogant and only intensified the negative wave that rose against him. Here he gets another chance to explain his position, this time without emotional influence. Macinka, when he's under the influence of emotions, puts on that arrogant shield. Maybe some of you do that too, that when you're being attacked, when you have the ability to react. When you don't have the argument, you put on an arrogant mask. You act or try to act confident and strong, and Macinka really overdoes it. And yesterday he showed it in all its glory. So here I would be interested to know if he has calmed down and can explain it like an adult.
No, we will not ban the media from our press conferences. Absolutely not. You saw it yourself. Well, not you, but your colleague from Czech television saw, and others saw as well, that unlike, for example, the president's press conference, where journalists aren't allowed to ask questions, I was answering questions there for about half an hour, maybe even longer, so we definitely don't have any such restrictive relations. So regarding journalists and that statement, I saw it. Yesterday I received a statement from several editors-in-chief of our media, led by Miroslav Benche from the Novinky website, and I have to admit there is something to what they wrote to me. So if Mrs. Pokorna was somehow affected by it as a form of psychosocial support, I'll take her somewhere with me.
Mr. Minister, I still want to follow up since your colleague Philip Turek.
All right, that's a relatively reasonable answer. I acknowledge that he's calmed down, he's no longer using an arrogant shield, and he's quite acceptable now.
He said on a YouTube broadcast that Deník N might even be banned from the Chamber of Deputies and would ask Chairman Tomio Okamura about it. I'm wondering if the coalition is considering restricting which journalists can access the chamber.
First of all, I'm glad that you're watching Philip Turek's broadcasts. You've never done that before, and I think that's the right thing to do. You should continue to watch Philip Turek and his broadcasts.
Do not watch my streams or pro-government media like Philip Turek's broadcasts. Absolutely not. Here are my streams, okay? This is the place where honest people come. However...
So that's fine. And if that's his opinion, I don't know. We haven't talked about it together, but it's true. What surprised me, I don't know the staff and the way journalists are accredited to the Chamber of Deputies, but I have a feeling that when I walk those 30 meters down the hallway, by far the most people there are from certain editorial offices, and they're not the biggest ones, but God forbid, I have an exceptionally positive relationship with journalists. Maybe some of you have noticed that, and I certainly wouldn't take any such steps, so it's hard to say.
When you had a meeting today with the head of European Union diplomacy, Kay Kalasova, can you tell us what exactly you talked about?
So the dominant topic was, of course, the war in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, but it was that kind of meeting.
He met with Kay Kalasova, so they had a drink together, right, man? She supposedly started drinking now.
We met in person for the first time. It was undoubtedly an important meeting before tomorrow's Council of Foreign Ministers, and it was just about clarifying our positions. We talked about what we think what the positions of the European Commission are on various issues. So in some things we may agree, in others not. But I think tomorrow's meeting and the other regular meetings of these union bodies will be important. I think our ministers won't deviate from how things have been going so far. So we're definitely not a country that stubbornly blocks something somewhere, although if there were to be a fundamental issue for us, for the Czech Republic, where we would have a strong position, then we would express that strong position. But it was a good, important first meeting between us because we'll probably be meeting regularly, and it was important to set up a certain style of communication.
You previously said that Mr. President has time, but from your statement yesterday, it seemed like you were going to very definitively tell Markku Rutemu that the President will not go to the NATO summit. So I'm interested, based on your answer, how much time does the President have? When do you want to decide whether he or the Prime Minister will go to the NATO summit? And what does it all depend on? Because in your answer you said there is still room for the President to attend the summit.
That's a strange question. The foreign minister doesn't decide alone who represents the Czech Republic. I hope Macinka tells that to the journalist.
My position is still the same, and that is that the President will either be in accordance with the Constitution or he won't be in accordance with the Constitution, and that's basically what it's all about and what everything depends on. So I think those notifications, but those texts said he has until Wednesday. Yes, because today I had a meeting not only with the Secretary General of NATO, but also with our representation in NATO, which will be handling this, which is responsible for it, which will be dealing with it. So I needed to inform them so they know what the situation is. That's all. And I think the process of preparing for the summit will start in about 2 or 3 months. That's how we see it. But I don't want to escalate the situation any further. I think that in the past few weeks, President has been very critical of our most prominent motorists politician, and I considered it important not to let it slide and to speak out strongly, and that's what I did. So that's the position. I think our voters expected that from me. I was also pushed into it by our voters, and I think so too. I don't think it's right for Mr. President to torpedo a successful politician in this way, someone who went through elections and is part of a government coalition that has a majority in the Chamber of Deputies. And it's also not right for Mr. President to take a certain stance on what the Chamber of Deputies is calling for, so that's all. So I just took this step. I don't want to escalate it any further. And again, I'm ready to talk about it calmly, rationally, behind closed doors, not sending messages through the media, not publishing any private correspondence, and so on. I didn't do it. The castle did. I said that it didn't surprise me, that maybe I kind of expected it could happen, so...
Well, that's your opinion, because if Macinka had expected it, of course he wouldn't have written in the style he did. It's a basic rule of any corporate correspondence or communication with anyone. Never communicate with someone in a way that you wouldn't want to be seen by someone else, or in a way that you wouldn't want to end up on the internet unless you trust that person, like if it's your mom, you know. And it's also a good idea not to text when you're drunk at midnight. That's just my personal theory. I don't have any proof, but those messages always come off like when I start writing under an emotional rush at midnight. And then in the morning after I sleep it off, I'm like, man, I'm such an idiot. Now I'm going to have to explain this. So in this regard, those text messages, the publication, it was actually a good move by Peter Pavel, because he played it like Macinka was blackmailing him, even though in those messages Macinka was actually threatening with really weak arguments like you won't go to the NATO summit or I'll badmouth you to journalists, which, you know, Macinka doesn't have the political mandate or capital for that. Macinka doesn't have the capital for it. Go to Brussels. And to change Mark Rutte's opinion of Peter Pavel, or to tell the media things from his position as Mr. Nobody, while Peter Pavel has a certain reputation thanks to the munitions initiative, his service at the second level of NATO, and so on. So in this regard, Macinka threatened him incredibly weakly, but in such a way that Peter Pavel could take it and sell it as blackmail. These are just Peter Pavel's political subtitles, in my opinion.
I have to say that on my part, it wasn't any improvisation, definitely not, but we'll see how the situation develops further. I don't agree with Mr. President's stance, and I think we should clear it up. If there's interest, I'll be glad to do it.
I would like to return to the defense spending because last year Czechia committed, just like the other alliance countries, to gradually increasing spending to 3.5% or even 5% of gross domestic product. Do you agree with Mr. Okamura, who said last week that 2% is enough and no increase is needed? Is this the cabinet's consensus?
Now think carefully about your words, Mr. Maga from above.
2% is enough for the army, is definitely enough for the army. I think we've already seen in previous years that the 2% is basically unspendable, that here within...
That's an unbelievable nonsense. The 2% is unspendable because the army is extremely... How should I put it? Inefficient in procurement and recruitment. Okay, recruitment, let's say, fair, but the 2% is too little, and our army isn't able to properly purchase things and doesn't have the means to spend it. So basically, they need more money so they can spend more money. Yeah, and to be stronger, more effective, and bigger. At this moment, it's as if it's like giving a child 10,000. A small child also can't spend 10,000 because he can't buy vodka, he can't just buy gas, he can't buy a lot of things, and maybe he doesn't know how to use some technologies and so on. But that doesn't mean 10,000 is a lot, right? That small child just isn't able to spend that money and thus increase his quality of life or his efficiency in making more money and functioning further.
The governance of that previous cabinet kept coming up with stranger and stranger ways.
I would describe it a bit differently. When you have one training center where you have a maximum training capacity of, if I'm not mistaken, 2,000 soldiers or 2,200 soldiers per year, then of course you have a certain amount of money that you can spend at most. But you should invest a lot more money into creating a second training center where you can train another 1,000 soldiers per year, so you can train 3,000 soldiers per year. Because there is interest from people, but there aren't enough capacities.
Which were supposed to be funded not because we needed something or because we would get something, but just so that money could be sent somewhere. That means it's an absolutely inefficient approach. I think our task is to find an approach that will be effective. So if it turns out that there are some expenses that are fruitful, that have a positive impact on...
Here's the question of how I view Collage working for the castle without clearance while communicating with the minister. Look, in this regard, I think it's quite a big mistake on Macinka's part that he's communicating with someone he says he doesn't want to communicate with. So maybe he shouldn't be communicating with him and should be communicating with someone who does have the clearance. Given that, of course, he's Pavel's advisor and Macinka wasn't giving Collage any secret information, then whatever, let him communicate with him. But if the problem here is that they're communicating with Collage, then let them communicate with someone else. And if the president refuses to communicate in any other way than through advisor Collage, then let them bring it properly to light and not just deal with it in Twitter posts and comment sections. Let them go to the big media, push the issue, resolve it, and argue it out. Because if you write to Collage and then gossip somewhere that Collage is running the president, then honestly, you're the idiot for writing to Collage. As he says, I saw a good argument from Martin Rota that if these messages, these texts weren't sent to Collage but I don't know, to a cleaning lady working at the castle, then Macinka would still be the fool for writing to the cleaning lady at the castle instead of someone who actually has the clearance and is supposed to be at the castle. Or, in the best case, when it's something this serious, it would be good to meet in person and write or talk face to face. And not that you don't show up for the meeting, it gets cancelled, and then you handle it through text messages.
Whether it's the Czech economy or Czech defense capability, then undoubtedly these expenses will be evaluated from that perspective. But so far we've seen that defense spending has only been evaluated from the perspective that in December tens of billions had to be sent for unsolicited prepayments, just so that the most expensive form in human history could be sent to NATO headquarters to show that we fulfilled something, and I think that should change. So let's think about how to use those expenses effectively so that they make sense and contribute to the defense capability of our country. I think it was stated, I believe it was the Supreme Audit Office, which really expressed significant doubts about whether the defense spending of the previous government had any impact at all on increasing the defense capability of the Czech Republic. Well, of course they didn't, and that's exactly what a responsible government evaluates. So I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't spend, but let's consider our spending and focus on what's important.
We have to spend on everything. Everything is important because for the last 30 years, everything has been totally neglected. Totally. Considering what to spend on, like, there's nothing to think about. No matter what you spend your money on, it's fine that you spent it because we don't have enough of anything, nothing is in good condition, and nothing works. That's just the way it is. So it doesn't matter how you spend the money. You need to spend it. Spend it on everything.
What is important to invest in? Should it be an investment in your own people? Or should it be an investment in critical infrastructure so that we don't have blackouts in the Czech Republic, meaning in some kind of transmission system?
Investment in the transmission system is part of the Green Deal, which you're canceling. So investment in the transmission system and energy is part of the Green Deal, which we reject, so it probably won't happen. If we want to solve it with our defense budget, fine, but we could have gotten European Union funding. Oh well.
In our opinion, it is related to the security of the Czech Republic, and it should therefore be recognized as an expenditure for the security and defense capability of the Czech Republic. What about Czech soldiers in the Arctic?
That's a joke, right? That was an attempt at a joke. That was an attempt at a joke, man. Our soldiers don't even have winter jackets, and you're going to send them to the Arctic. Unless they served with the Finns who dressed them. Yeah?
So that really wasn't the topic of today's meeting with the NATO Secretary General. Well, great. Thank you very much. We're moving on to the next one. Thank you.
So look, it's okay with me. Macinka handled it well. You can really see there's a big difference between Macinka when he's emotional and Macinka after he's calmed down, got some, let's say, tips, or received some feedback from the Prime Minister and so on. In short, Macinka gave a paw. And yeah, at this moment he communicated quite well, even though there were some aggressive and non-factual things here and there, but that's just politics. And in this regard, I have to praise him that the interview wasn't a total pain, which with Macinka is often a total pain. So yeah, look, write in the comments what you think about it. How did Macinka seem to you, and what are your thoughts on the Peter Pavel versus Peter Macinka case? Personally, I think it was a huge political mistake by Peter Macinka. Peter Pavel made a smart move, like with the Queen or another piece, by making those messages public, which got public opinion on his side. He triggered society's immunity, and at the same time I would say that he pretty much took the wind out of the sails of any potential media scandal that Macinka might have caused. Or in fact, he pretty much took the possible wind out of the sails of any scheme that Macinka could have put together with Okamura and the Prime Minister if it hadn't been made public. But once it was made public, the whole scheme fell apart. Because it's public, Babiš has to back off and so on. So that's it. In my opinion, Macinka handled it the best way he could. The main thing is that he managed to calm down, so to speak. and we'll see each other again. The stream continues. Join the streams and watch more videos. Thanks a lot for the donations you sent during this broadcast. For example, 100 just came in now. All right, see you for now.